Hi, welcome to the Heather Penny podcast. We're excited to have you here. We've got some great guests joining us, a lot of profound wisdom and insight that I think you're going to learn a lot, because I know we get to learn from one another and we just get to join our collective wisdom together and move out into this world so that we can get more clarity, more confidence, and more courage. More importantly, so that you can step into the life that only you are made for. So let's dive in. Hello, everyone. It's so good to have you all here today. I have CJ with us, and I am so excited to talk with him. We started talking before we started recording here, and I thought I better hurry up and press record because we'll waste all this great conversation. But he is a media producer and author of a book called
Get Weird.
All right, Get Weird. Yeah, I love that title, Get Weird. So I'm really excited to talk with him because we're going to jump into a little bit about strengthening identity. I know it's his heartbeat on how we strengthen our identity, both for ourselves personally and for our children that are developing, and really for all of humanity and how we move forward as a team on this planet Earth. So CJ, tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Yeah. So who I am is I'm a husband, I'm a dad. And I, for work stuff, I'm a writer by nature. I've spent about 10, 15 years, kind of lost track at this point, writing, helping other people write what's their soul, kind of get their identity out on paper. I run a small little boutique media company that focuses on sort of episodic media production. We tell documentary stories, we tell animated stories, we tell some stories for kids and learning and education. We have a project called Ring Beller that's really fun. We're in the middle of a crowdfunding campaign right now, actually, for the next sort of batch of videos that we're working on. And Ring Beller is, we call it like TED Talks meets Sesame Street. So
I love it.
It's stuff that we put, it's about 1,300 classrooms around the world right now, helping kids learn really urgent skills like kindness, empathy, a love for diversity. And so we do it in really fun ways. We bring in all these creative leaders and people who are making a difference in their community. And we have an alien and a robot named Crumbaker and Unk who interview them and try and figure out why Earth is so weird.
Okay. So I personally want to give to that. Tell me how, and tell our listeners who are probably getting excited about helping our kids. How do you give to that?
Yeah, it's makeuskinder.com.
Okay.
So makeuskinder.com. Mm-hmm.
Okay, perfect. And there's a way to give a donation there?
Yeah, and you can get some fun stuff in exchange. There's a book a little kids book that I wrote just for this project called Turn Off the TV, Theodore B. And you can get that. You can get a Ring Beller pin from the Planet Ring Beller. You can get lots of fun little perks, and they make really good holiday gifts too. So
of course. Oh my gosh. I can't wait to get on that website myself.
That's my sales pitch.
Good. Yeah. Shameless plug, CJ.
Let's just start this thing off the right way. Let's just.
That's right, man. We're trying to move humanity forward. We got to figure out how we're doing that. Yeah. Well, let's jump in and talk a little bit about strengthening identity, because that's the series that we're working on. And you were actually referred to me by a dear mutual friend of ours who said, this guy has really studied identity, values the strengthening of it. And I guess I want to start there. What is appealing to you as you think about this topic of how we strengthen our identity?
Yeah, I think the first thing is that nobody really quite knows what identity is, or I should say everybody has a different definition of identity. And so I think starting off with that baseline and respecting that there's a ton of different perspectives out there when it comes to this very, very heavy, relevant word, identity, would be, I think, something that's just a good idea. And then I've personally kind of been on this journey of sort of figuring out, well, what does identity mean to me? And what do I think it means? And what would be a helpful definition sort of moving forward? If I get to, if one other person hears this podcast, which I'm sure a lot more will, because you're awesome and you have this great, community around what you're doing, but what would I want to tell them about their identity?
What would you want to tell them? now you get, I have to ask the question. What would you want to tell them?
Well, again, it's just my definition. So let's go with that. But I don't think identity is something that lives outside of us. Like I think it's it's within us. And I don't think it's the land we come from necessarily. I don't think it's our ethnicity, our occupation, the relationships we have. I think those are all really important things, by the way. But I think like heritage, for example, it's super important. We're having a big national, if not global, discussion about heritage right now. But I think one of the reasons why identity is such a slippery slope of a term right now, nobody can really sort of get their heads around it, is because we've given other people the power to tell us what identity is. So there's this really wonderful Irish poet named John O'Donohue, who is sadly no longer with us. I don't know if you know, you're nodding your head. I'm sure you know.
I love him.
One of my favorite. And he has got a quote that says, a lot of people confuse identity with their biography. And I like to say people confuse their identity with their story. And like there's a huge emphasis right now on story in our culture, right? And it's like, your story matters, tell your story. And I like to tell people, it's like, your story doesn't matter as much as you might have been told that it does. And I know that sounds a little bit, weird, but the beautiful part about a story is also its inherent weakness, right? You can change your story. You can manipulate your story. And that means if you choose to, you can either tell the truth or you can falsify your story, and you can create another story altogether. I mean, I think about Instagram, for example. I mean, there's an entire industry dedicated to making it easier and easier to do this. And I think the grave mistake is confusing what we project with who we actually are.
Oh yeah, I totally get it. I want to circle around with the story because as you're talking, this is what's getting me thinking. I introduced my book with an allegory of this little girl who gets a bracelet, and she loves this bracelet, and she's little and she loves this bracelet, and it's beautiful and it makes her feel cherished and loved. And she goes and runs and plays in her tire swing and has a blast. But what happens is she starts growing up. She gets more and more bracelets until pretty soon she can't keep visiting her tire swing. And she wonders why she's getting sadder and sadder and heavier, but she's trying to balance these bracelets that are going all the way up past her elbow. That's preventing her to do what she actually loves. So, I was thinking about that as you're talking. I'm like, oh yeah, introducing identity with story. So powerful. How we tell our story. That's my story. That is what crafted my identity. And as I put that story out there, that represents my identity, what I've grappled with. But I want to link it even further to when you said the internal and the external. I love that thought because who we are forming internally is impacted externally by what we hear about ourselves. But there comes a time in our life when we can't keep looking to the world to define us. It's appropriate when we're 12 or 5, right?
Yeah.
But there comes a time when we keep looking outside to the world to say, will you define us? It's like saying, what's my other bracelet I have to put on? And I've stopped defining myself. I'm going to let you keep defining me.
Yeah.
And so I loved when you said that. And it makes me want to ask this question. When was there a time that you felt defined by the world externally and you felt like this is me? And I'll start with me first. So I'll give you a little time to think on that. But when I was in high school, I remember becoming the captain of my softball team. And I thought, I think I'm a leader.
Yeah.
So that was important for me as a 16-year-old kid kind of emerging in this world. I needed to be affirmed externally.
Yeah.
What happened then later on throughout my 20s and 30s is saying, where do I want to lead? How do I get to lead? How do I want to enhance my leadership? That's where I had to own it internally. So my identity became kind of the synergistic combination between external and internal, but I couldn't give it all to the world, nor could I not ignore how the world was perceiving me.
Yeah.
Complicated question, but now I'm going to throw it to you.
No. And this is what's very interesting about this term, because I've come to think that anything external, it could be affirming your identity, but it does not where it's not where the conversation starts. So I think I define identity as sort of this scientifically proven uniqueness that you have. Your inescapable weirdness, so to speak. So
like your fingerprint.
It's that place that nobody externally can manipulate or tamper with.
Oh, I love
not
that.
Even, and here's the thing, not even yourself, which we like to a lot, too, again, in projecting our story. So I like to say it's who you were before your surroundings told you who you were or who you are.
Before you got your bracelets.
Yeah.
I got
you. And I think that our journey is to get to know that person, to have a conversation with that person, to make peace with that person, and ultimately love that person.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Okay. So then I have to say, how did you do that in your own journey?
Well, I'm an expert at it, which is great. I'm totally figured it out.
I'm sure you have.
No bad days. It's great. So, I think when I probably realized, what was it like, kind of one of those moments where it was like, this is who I'm made to be. Right. I think, when I was a kid, I was in art or English class, and, there was a blank page. Right. And I think it's so much scarier now as an adult to look at that that blank page and go, what do we do with it? But I don't think I was afraid of it, or perhaps I stayed unafraid of it longer than maybe some of my peers and some of my classmates were as a kid. And so that's sort of, and not only that, but I also realized, like, I'm not only not afraid of it, but this is actually fun to create something out of nothing. I actually really enjoy this. And so I thought, maybe there was some extra time and attention from the heavenly powers that be when they were designing me, and maybe they put more attention and time in that department. And that's why every coach stuck me out in right field, in a little league. So.
Okay. My wheels are turning, CJ, because I'm listening to you and I go, I'm hearing my own little simple allegory of this book, this picture book I wrote. And to me, I'm realizing, okay, that's having to do with so much about true identity. The climax, of course, of the book is she can't manage the bracelets and she's feeling miserable. And so she has to go spend time under the stars. And under the stars, she hears a voice that says, take off your bracelets. It's never who you were. And then the book ends with, wow, how do I love who I truly am, which is my spirit of who I am. Yeah. So
it's beautiful.
Isn't it beautiful? Analogy. So I'm like, at the risk of sounding like I'm saying, I'm amazing, CJ. I'm hearing you say this and I go, this is so fun to hear you talk about your grappling with defining identity and listening to it through the allegory, which many of my listeners are familiar with. Many of my clients jump on the line now with me that says, Heath, I need help getting onto the stars. I need help getting on my tire swing again. I need help with these bracelets. How do I get them off? Yeah. And that's really the work I do. I'm like, wait a minute. Do you want this bracelet anymore? It was given to you. Is it truly who you are? Are you tired of managing it, or do you want to manage it? I mean, the reality is of adulting, we have to manage some of these bracelets, but they don't have to impact your identity, because their true identity is really your spirit.
We've given people so much authority to paint a picture of us that they were never asked to.
Yes.
Except by us.
Exactly. So one of the things is, as a coach, and of course, as an educator, and as a parent, is like, how do we get these kids younger and younger? How do we get humans younger and younger to start evaluating, do I want this bracelet? I don't know if I want this. I mean, wouldn't that be powerful? They're asking that at 8 years old versus waiting till we're 32 going, how do we get these stacked on? Yeah. That's the gap I'm seeing, that I go, if we can go after them securing their true identity instead of tap dancing for the world to figure out how to keep up with everything. Yeah. I'm wondering if that's the secret of so much of the anxiety our children and really our adults are struggling with, that is growing exponentially in our world.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's two ways to do that. One is to be really, really bad at it, which it looks like we're getting there.
Yeah.
And as we're seeing, even with some of the issues Gen Z and millennials are facing, looking at the generation before them and going, I don't want to be that way. I don't want to do that
thing
the same way. So that's one way to do it. We could just really burn our or try and burn our identities to the ground, even though I don't think you actually can, but just really not be really bad at living into the person that we're meant to be, or I think the much healthier way, and the way that feels way more generative and creative and beautiful, is to learn how to do it well and to model it in our kids as soon as humanly possible. And it's a journey. It's something that doesn't happen overnight, but I don't think we're making a lot of choices and following a lot of examples as a culture overall right now without really, we talk so much about the metaverse, and all. Meta is such a big word right now. I don't think we're having a meta conversation about, should we even be giving our lives and our data and our privacy and our souls away to things that are inherently designed to mask our identity.
We're not even asking that question, are we?
No.
Yeah, that's where I started realizing as a researcher, we don't even have the language to evaluate how this is impacting our identity. And I think as a coach and advisor and an educator and researcher, I've like, everything is pointing to this. How do we help humans hang on to their true spirit of who they are created to be, to hang on to their beautiful weirdness? I love that you wrote that book, because when I work with clients, I'll go, yeah, you're weird. What's the point? We're all weird. Right. You want to own that beautiful weirdness, because it's our weirdness that changes the world. It's not our conformity that changes the world. It's the weirdness that we have to celebrate in each other and recognize that we need more of that.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, you're a parent. Tell us a little bit about how you are opening those lines of communication with your kids.
Yeah, it's definitely something I'm stumbling through. Nobody gives you a handbook when becoming a parent. And, in this, it's funny, in this world of, you can create any story that you want to right now. It's like I've seen people who like had kids, and then 2 years later, they now have repositioned their personal brand as like expert parent. I'm like, you can't do that. Like that's, you have to be like 85 to maybe, understand what it's. So I say everything with the grain of salt, that I'm just working through it. But I am trying to seed examples and little, breadcrumbs and reminders of who they are before it kind of, the world sort of gets to them and tells them that there's something else. So we keep technology and media like really, really at a minimum in our house. That's just a decision, that we've had. And one of the things I love telling my kids, and my daughter, my son's pretty young, but my daughter's just at that age where she's starting to sort of question this sort of beautiful kind of bubble that she, has grown up in so far. And now she's out in the world, however worldly a third grade classroom can be, but she's starting to, that shield is starting to break down, where people might say, or, a classmate might say, hey, look, I don't like the way you look. I don't like how you said that, or whatever. And so, just trying to provide a haven in our sort of family dynamic where she is loved for who she is, regardless of what she does. And I think there is such a emphasis in our Western culture, and we do it without even recognizing it, of parenting and teaching our kids, you are worthy, or you are accepted because of what you have done or what you have not done. And I think you can trace every sort of foundational rift in culture and fracture in culture back to that mentality. And I'm not saying meritocracy isn't important. I'm not saying we shouldn't try hard, but if we're not going back to the days of watching Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, where Fred went, you're special just the way you are. I mean, it's so funny how much we praise this guy in culture, and we actually don't live like that's true.
So well said. And I think I love that you brought up Fred Rogers, because he went after the tiny ones, right? The littles in our society.
Yeah.
And they were preschoolers, and that's when they're most receptive. And that's when they're so impressionable. And we stop saying it to our kids, or we forget
Yeah.
how they're getting inundated, and we don't know how to balance it out to reinforce their
Yeah.
uniqueness. And I think
Yep.
that's why I love what you're doing. How do we continue to grow that language so they can start rejecting the labels that are identifying them as broken
Yeah.
or dysfunctional or even anxious, or these labels we're giving our children, instead of
Yeah.
saying, you're really creative. Wow, you're really active. Wow, you're really high energy.
Yeah.
Those are beautiful things. And instead
Yeah.
we're slapping negative labels on them, and they're buying into it.
So one of the things I started doing was with my son, who's 3. I have a son and a daughter, and I love my daughter so much. I love both of them so much, but I will never quite fully understand what it means to be in her shoes as a woman. With my son, I can sort of go like, okay, I have a little bit more framework for what it was like to be a boy and growing up, and to be, to grow up and being a man. And so I've written poems and thoughts, and I really dedicated the book to my daughter, but I've started writing poems for my son, and it really is around this concept of identity. So I brought a few. I brought one. Can I share? Is that cool?
I was
Okay.
like hoping you would.
All right, I've got it on my computer. This is called the dust you were made from. So, you know the truth deep inside you. May you doubt 1,000 things, but never that. Let it steady you and guide you home instantly. Do not search for my voice, or perhaps the voice you might wish I had, when lies disguise themselves and try to disguise you as well. But look for yours alone, not far off on some unreachable island, or locked behind a certain threshold. There is a strength that begins in the dust you were made from and branches out broader than your body for you to run freely in, or sit, or lie down, whatever you know it's meant for.
Wow. Gosh, CJ, I love that. I think the first thing I just want to say is thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Our world needs your voice. Our children need your voice. Our adults, our parents, our educators, our counselors, our teachers, they need that strengthening that anchors them into leading our humanity forward in this. I think the very first question that comes to my mind as you were reading that is, I wrote down this phrase, look for yours alone. Oh my gosh, I love that. How do you anchor yourself in staying true to you and looking for yours alone?
Yeah. Well, again, I'm a total expert at it and never struggle with it at all. So
me neither. That's why we're doing podcasts.
It's really funny. It's this weird combination of people who are super close to me and people I've never met before in my life. So I think the process of having kids, or at least being around kids, is really interesting because they are so honest and so sort of divorced from all of the barnacles that have sort of glommed onto us, the bracelets, to use your analogy, over time. And so my kids are incredibly centering to me because the things that they care about are so not the things that I care about. And then it reminds me of like what I cared about when I was their age. And it's all the stuff that my parents were probably thinking of: who am I and what do I do? What's my occupation, vocation, and how much money am I making? And it's like that. Just, do you love me? Can we go and like take a walk to the park? Can we go? It's so simple. So for me to enter into that, every day is a really, really forced kind of centering process. And I know that's not I know that feels like such an unbelievable blessing from the universe to have that. I think finding somebody who, not in a weird codependent way, but another blessing would be like finding somebody, a partner who truly loves you and sees you for who you are. I think that's why, for me, marriage is such a wonderful thing, because it's like, you don't you don't get sexier. My wife does. I don't get sexier as I get older. No, most people don't. Most people, there are wrinkles and everything. And I think the beautiful thing about, a marriage is it's this constant, as it grows, it's this constant sort of realizing that, okay, this is based on something deeper. It can't be based on that external story that I'm trying to tell other people on social media or in my job or whatever. It's got to, for it to work, it's got to be based on something truer and deeper. So that's sort of like, the people who are really close to me. I think keeping people and friends who, and it sounds so simple, but truly love you for who you are, is, priority number one. And then the beautiful part about this conversation of identity is we're so not alone in it. I've found real solace in voices of people who, whenever I read them, I feel like they're sitting across from me, but they're long past from this earth. I feel like their spirit is still roaming and still very near to me. But folks like Thomas Merton and John O'Donohue, and then whenever I find a really good poet, dead or living, it's like, oh my goodness, I've never met you before. I never had the privilege of being on the earth, and at the same time you were there, but you're speaking to my soul, and you're reminding me of who I actually am, apart from who the world tells me that I am. And so those two things really center me on a day-to-day basis, or whenever I choose to engage them. And I think when I'm not feel like I'm living out of my true self, it's because I haven't done a really good job of engaging either of those. Yeah.
I love that. I'm reading a book right now by Julian It's actually by Matthew Fox, talking about Julian Norwich. And I think, what was that, 1200s, and she's living through the Black Plague. And it's so synonymous to what we're dealing with the pandemic. And I'm learning, I feel like her spirit is still here 500-600 years later. And you think about leaving your legacy or leaving your fingerprints on this world. Isn't that our hope? Talk about our identity coming out. And I
don't know if she ever really did hope for that. I don't know. I think she was so in the middle of just trying to make it, as a woman back then, like, please don't kill me. Like, and for these heretical thoughts. Yeah. And look at us now, speaking about her.
Yeah. And she was in a hermitage in Anchorage, which is like a secluded place where she lives in this little room off the side of the church for, I think, 30 years. I mean, I was like, what? Who does this? So you're right. It's just like, even some of the voices that are whispering to us over the centuries, the poets, the writers, the people who live their life weirdly, right? Aren't they the ones that, get weird so that we can have this whole new sense of what's going to ripple and support our identity instead of what's going to push us to conform to something we're not made to. The title of my book is The Life You're Made For. I so strongly believe that each of us are made for a life that we're supposed to live. And if we don't live it, the world will suffer. So my job isn't to tell you what your life is. My job is to say, hey man, take off those bracelets, get under the stars, get back on your tire swing, go figure out what it is that you're made for. And then how do I support you with your clarity, your confidence, and your courage?
Yeah.
But I love the thought you said earlier. It made me think of this example. Meeting our kids where they're at is so simple, and we make it so complex. If we could just get out of the way. My son, I have older kids now, 17 and 19. And so I just love getting to know them as adults. And I think they're fascinating. And one of the false beliefs I hear people say about teenagers is they're kind of terrible, or they're miserable, or it's those teenage years. And I just want to invite everybody listening, love your teenagers. They're so fascinating. They're so fun, move into the true belief that they are moving into their identity. And it's uncomfortable for everybody because they're pulling against you, but that's what we want. And so I just kind of feel like I leaned over with this curiosity going, wow, who are you becoming? But one of the things, my son, he's 17, Luke, and I know he won't mind me telling the story, but he comes home and I have my office out of the home. And I just love when he wants to come into my office and chat with me, and I'm going really deep and I can't wait to find out what his day is. Or I ask fun questions like, what made you laugh today? And he loves it. We have a great time, but he's like, Mom, this chair is so uncomfortable in the office. And I'm like, what? My chair's uncomfortable? And it's just this funny little thing now that I go, that's where I want to meet him, where he is. The next time he came to my office, I had a huge, in fact, I'll show it over here if I can. If you're on video. It's this chair, this leather chair that I got, that it's just all set up for him to come and sit down and enjoy. And now he has this great chair that he comes and sits down. And I didn't even think about an uncomfortable chair, right? But meeting my 17-year-old son on this previous chair was so uncomfortable, and saying, if this is going to make you stay longer, I'll go buy a more comfortable chair.
Yeah.
If this is going to make you want to talk with me.
Yeah.
And so it was such a small, simple thing. And it just reminds me, our children are very beautifully simple of what they're asking for, and how we make it so complex.
Well, he'll probably remember that for the rest of his life. I mean, those are the kinds of things.
I hope so. Yeah. I hope he feels that he's loved for what it is that he wanted. And, my mom agenda is he does stay longer now and chat with me. So I love it.
No, I remember going back to that blank page thing. I remember my mom went on a crusade really early on, and before I could even speak about how, and I thought this was so interesting. I talk about it in the Get Weird book too. Like, she just didn't like the idea of giving kids coloring books because it was literally conforming to patterns and coloring the lines. So she just gave me all this. Like, my dad was an IT guy back in the 80s and 90s, when like there was all that, those crazy printer papers that were perforated, and sort of, he was bringing home stacks and stacks. I was probably solely responsible for the whole rainforest, being the deforestation of America or something like that. But it was that kind of, those things are the things I remember beyond anything else. And again, they're probably so simple, but so profound.
Yeah. Do you give your kids coloring books?
No.
Oh, okay. So you follow through with that. Way to go, Mom.
No.
What do you give them?
A non-coloring book family. What was actually, this is really fun. I'll try and make the story short, but when the manuscript, when I was working on the galleys for the Get Weird book, this is such a strange, cosmically cool sort of thing, but they had sent me, they had overnighted it, and they're in Nashville where I am. They're like, I could have gone pick them up, but for whatever reason, like, they overnighted it. And this is the first time I, experienced, writing a book before. So I didn't know what I was supposed to be getting in the mail. Yeah. And so I got like a giant stack with like the title page, and then every other page was completely blank. And I email the publisher. I'm like, am I supposed to sign off on like just that? Well, cause it wasn't blank. It had like little page numbers or something. I'm like, is it? They're like, no, that is not what we meant to send. Somebody had literally so the recent, but what's really neat is for like 2 years afterwards, my kids had this giant stack that had it had little flavors in the corner. It would say Get Weird and everything, because it still had some of the markings and everything. And so what a neat way. And again, I started the book by telling that story of my mom and everything. Just what a cool way for that to sort of live on in a really tangible way in our house.
That is so cool. I've done so much work with art. It started out with children because I was working with a lot of at-risk, and I was trying to get them settled. And I did research on the right side of the brain and integrating art. So at the first 10 minutes of every language arts class, I would start out with classical music playing, the lights dimmed, and they just would draw whatever came to their mind to start settling their spirit. I had no idea what that would do. It ended up, they went from a 30% passing rate to 70% passing rate. And it just moved me into really developing a lot with these kids that were at risk and trying to get them to graduate with a diploma. But it moved me into doing workshops with adults where we would engage with the art. And I would do 30 minutes of art. Of course, the first 5 to 10 minutes, they're terrified. When was the last time they sat down with a blank piece of paper in front of them and were just told to relax and create? And it really hit me how much pain there is in our creativity. Somewhere along the line, especially back in grade school, and you talk about identity, and I saw this as a teacher, they got told that their art wasn't good enough. Well, the art is so connected to the heart, and that is connected to our identity. And so how our art is handled and treated is usually pretty roughly in this world. So by the time we're adult, how many adults that say, oh, I'm an amazing artist?
Right.
Nobody says that anymore. And I go, when did we stop believing in our art? I mean, talk about a connection with our identity. And so that's part of it. A funny little crusade I have is like, stick figures go, man. There's no critique in art. Like, when did we start critiquing that so hard?
Yeah. That's interesting. That's really interesting.
I know. Letting our people flow with their creativity, I think, is so connected to the identity. And so you're in a creative profession. How do you grow your creativity and link it with your identity in a way that becomes your true sense of self? What do you do?
Wow, that's a really good question. I mean, I write, I try and write a ton. I should be writing more. I think we all can be writing more. And then there is for me, there's a difference between drawing inspiration from what's happening in the moment and drawing inspiration from a really wide breadth of people who have worked on these things, worked on this craft for centuries and centuries. So I found that it helps me to sort of shut down kind of the current sort of noise, out there. Not that there's not really great stuff. I mean, I think this is part of a much bigger conversation. But for me, right now, there's a real sort of conflict between what we're calling a creator and what we're calling a manufacturer. Or there's a lot of we're a lot of people who are creators or call themselves content creators. They're sort of enslaved to an algorithm versus answering a muse. And so I think I need to, what helps me is shutting down that algorithm as much as possible and listening to the muse, listening to those who, again, have gone far, 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 before me, and try and write and create from that place. And it's really hard because that's not, I don't know, it's not a popular thing to do. I'm certainly not winning any contests, doing that, but it's what feeds my soul and gives me sort of that boost to go out and sort of generate and iterate again.
Gosh, I love that term. I'm going to ask a practical question. You are creative by profession. When do you let the muse shift into generating revenue and creating a sense of, you know what I'm saying? I'm asking that practical question as one entrepreneur to another.
It's a very practical question. And I was just talking with a friend who is a music producer this morning about it. And we were talking about that question. I think that is the great dance for me. It's been helpful to name those two and not try and confuse them together. And this has been, I kind of joke about being, I was joking before about being an expert and stuff, and whatever. It's like, I really, this is an ongoing challenge for me. I mean, try writing a book, right? You put your entire soul into something, and then you've got to go market it and sell it. And turns out publishers are not really interested in sort of doing that for you. And so that is a really vulnerable, scary process where you're literally shifting between right and left brain, the whole time. If you're an Enneagram, I'm a 4 with a 3 wing. So it's the individualist meets the achiever, and they are constantly battling each other. But for me, recently, it's been really good to go, I do services for people, and I'm putting it in that mental category of they are the customer, they're in charge, they're paying me to do what I do well. And so there's a respect there that I'm not going to let them walk all over me, but I'm not going to confuse that with my own art and my own sort of creative expression. And on a really good day, Heather, when I'm doing those things right, they feed each other really well. It creates this symbiotic sort of relationship. And I think that's happened even more once I stopped trying to separate those two things and say, you guys, you stay over here and you stay over here, but go, all right, you guys are different. You're not always going to get along with each other, but you got to live together. I'm going to stick you in the same room, and don't get into a fist fight. So I have to kind of parent them a little bit.
Oh, I love that. I love that because as a coach, I'm pretty much paid to help people move forward in life.
Yeah.
So I work with a lot of stuck muses.
Yeah.
They want to go on and on about all their creativity. I'm like, yes, it's wonderful. It's amazing. And I have a lot of people who come to me and say, oh, Head, I want to be a coach. I'm like, oh, that's amazing. I don't mean to be crass, but can you sell?
Yeah, right.
I want to go ahead and check off the box that you love people and that you're probably really good at helping people. And that's wonderful. But eventually you're going to have to figure out how to market yourself, sell what you want to offer this world, and figure out how to close the deal. Part of what I see is a lot of muses stay stuck in, I just want to create. And I want to say, then awesome. It's an awesome hobby. But if you want this to be your profession, you have to figure out how to integrate the manufacturer, or maybe there's a better word for it, CJ, if the manufacturer's the villain. But
I wouldn't say it's the villain. I just don't.
Mm-hmm.
I think our problem as a society is that we confuse the two and call them the same thing. And so we need manufacturers,
Okay.
or we need manufacturing, and we also need creators and artists who usually the muse is this notion that something's off with the algorithm and we shouldn't be just manufacturing all the time. But what I have a problem with is when we start calling manufacturers artists and creators.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. It's insulting to us muses and creators, isn't it?
Sure. And it's honestly a lot of pressure from manufacturers because some people are really good at that.
Yeah.
So I think separating those two and honoring both roles in a business, in a culture, in a society is a really good thing. And to know this is what this role is and this is what this role is. And yes, they can talk to each other and bleed into each other. And I'm not saying a manufacturer can't be creative and a creative can't be a really good, salesperson or scales person. Is that a word? I guess
Let's make it one.
If I said that confidently, that would have been such a good podcast line.
Say it again confidently. We'll edit it out.
Right. Like hashtag scales person. You know what I'm saying? But yeah, that's.
I love that. And then do you feel like you hold that balance pretty well, or do you have people help you hold that balance?
I have people helping me hold that balance. I'm just starting, I think, to do it better than I've historically done it in the past.
And I'm sorry, but full circle moment, doesn't that go back to our identity? Right?
I think, yeah,
for me,
I think so. Yeah.
I feel like I know what I'm good at and I know what I'm not good at. Now 51, I'm getting better and better at that going, oh, I'm good at this. Let me do this and run with it. I am so not good at this. Will you please help me and bring your expertise here? Yeah. But don't cross over for my expertise because that's my identity. That's my fingerprints. That's my weirdness.
Yeah. That's good. That's really good. I love that.
Man, I've loved this conversation. I feel like we could talk all day.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
Let's go let's get weird and change the world. Huh? Let's end with this question. There are I love that you talked about this tension because it's one of the chapters in my book of holding tensions. I think the older we get and the more we want to step out in this world and really live the life we're made for and do great things, we have to get more and more comfortable with tensions like muse and manufacturers. Sidetrack. That's another book, I think. That is so another book for you.
We're just copyright all. Get GoDaddy and
serious.
Get these URLs.
So I think what would be some encouragement you would give people as you talk about strengthening your identity and really kind of holding these tensions that we're facing in this world?
Yeah, encouragement is a thing that we really all need. The only thing I can draw from is my own sort of experience and journey. Like I've really, really struggled with this topic for a long time. I mean, I can tell you stories of just feeling like the most outsidiest outsider ever. And struggling with self-doubt and not being sure of who I am. And so this is I think why I love sort of just having conversations about this. It's because I genuinely love I'm trying to figure this out. I am in process of believing my own words. I can't tell you how many times my wife would be like, I'd have a conversation with her and she'd be like, didn't you write a book on that? And I'm like, yeah, but that guy didn't know what he was talking about. And so, I mean, and I think that's so many of us. So it goes back to me to that identity versus story thing. I mean, as a writer, I do love a good story. I'm not trying to poop on story. But I realized at some point, and I think the ongoing realization is that you can assign an identity to yourself and to other people when in reality, everyone is just telling a story about themselves and others that may or may not be true. And once you kind of realize that, I think it sort of reframes and redistributes what's important. For me, at some point, and I can give you examples, but it's like there's these moments where it's like I just decided as like, I'm more interested in loving a person than I am in loving a story.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Wow. I like that thought. And I think it's also almost like taking back story, making it work for us and not against us. We get to
Well, it's a
create.
tool. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
But it's the
True
same thing when I
narrative.
was saying about,
Mm-hmm.
manufacturing
Mm-hmm.
and creating. It's like, it's great that they both exist, but let's not confuse the two with each other.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What is wrong with being an ordinary human being? That
Mm.
is an incredible gift and miracle
Mm-hmm.
that happens every day. And yet, again, the scientific odds of it
Mm.
replicating you are
Mm-hmm.
it's zero. It's an incredible thing. And you talk about our kids and you talk about why they're struggling with their identity. It's
Mm-hmm.
because we are sort of going with this giant sort of sea of thought that we can now just create any sort of story that we want to about ourselves and about the people around us
Mm.
and call it our identity. When in
Mm.
reality, we need to take that back and go, there's something sacred about us
Mm-hmm.
that can't be touched, that can't be manipulated, that can't be filtered, that can't be coerced. Um, and I think if we start living
Mm-hmm.
that way and at the same time start respecting that truth is in our fellow
Mm-hmm.
human being,
Mm-hmm.
if we have that resonance of awe, not in only ourselves, but each other,
Mm-hmm.
that is some really powerful stuff. That's the kind of stuff that can start to change paradigms, starts to change communities, and start to facilitate belonging.
I love that. I love that because I'm thinking of a story of myself in my 20s when I dealt with a lot of anxiety and I was told, yeah, you're an anxious person. You deal with anxiety. And I thought, well, that's a terrible destiny for me.
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know? And what I began to realize is I got in touch more with my true identity is I'm not an anxious person. I'm actually a highly peaceful person.
Hmm.
My anxiety is manifesting that my peace is getting very rippled.
Yeah.
So as I embrace the fact that I'm highly sensitive to my environment and the peace is very important to me, I begin to realize I get to cultivate peace.
Yeah.
My anxiety is showing me that my peace is getting disturbed. And
Yeah.
my identity in this world is really to be one that cultivates peace.
Yeah.
So as I started shifting that awareness, oh my goodness, I loved it. Instead of saying I got to manage my anxiety, I get to cultivate my peace and the
Yeah.
way I live, my environment, the way I set up my schedule, my calendar, the
Yeah.
way I choose to do my day. It's like, I don't know. If I start getting a little anxious, it's because my peace is not dominating how I'm living my life. So I have to get in touch with, no, Heather, you're made to be a very peaceful person. Create the peaceful calendar that you need in order to live your life and invite people into that and create well. And if you're getting anxious, it's just because your peace is not getting to dominate the identity like you're meant to do.
Yeah.
And so even as I work with a lot of people with anxiety, I said, oh, you're probably someone who's very sensitive to peace. So
Hmm.
let's talk about cultivating peace instead of how we manage our anxiety.
Yeah.
Wow.
Love that.
Any last thoughts before we sign off, CJ?
No, I'd love to. I've got one more poem about this stuff that I've written for my kids. So my son
Yes.
again. Maybe that's a good way to
Let's
wrap
close
it
with
up.
that.
Again, it's just something I think about a lot, and yeah, it comes out in some of this writing. But this one's called a soft voice. I hope you develop a soft voice. While this comes naturally to some, for others it is learned, or else it's forced. For many, we must unlearn the clanging of pots and pans, the fist punching at airwaves, the curriculum that taught us to control decibels and frequencies from gym class to calls with customer service. Only when a voice realizes it needn't try to breathe underwater does it rise to the level of sunlight, branded by an ancient silence, a fiery strength.
Wow. A fiery strength. Yes. That's what I want to end on. That's what I want to end on. I think each of our identities are meant to be a fiery strength in this world. And that's really my hope for everybody listening. All right, CJ, keep going.
All right. It's been a joy. I love talking to you.
Yes. Let's please stay in touch. And is there a website that I know you mentioned it for your crowdfunding? Is that the same website that people can find you?
That's for the crowdfunding campaign. If you want to just keep in touch with the work that I do and, all that good stuff, you can go to my website is cjcas.com. It's cjcas.com.
Perfect. All right. Thanks so much for joining me. And I'm already looking forward to watching you from my corner of the world and see what you're doing, and just know I'm cheering you on. And if our paths cross again, lucky me.
Thanks, Heather. No, I really appreciate the conversation. It's been great.
All right. Take care, everyone.